Après moi, le déluge. The motto of 617 Squadron, also known as the Dambusters. Welcome to my short-ish appreciation of the Operation Chastise the Dambusters raids, which took place on the night of the 16th and 17th of May 1943. I thought it'd be nice to start off with that little slideshow. I've just did a reveal, hopefully in one piece. Behind here we've got, sure enough, we've actually got Guy Gibson's G for George, which I'll zoom you in so you can see. And here we go. Excuse me. Oh yes, he's having a few problems. There we go, G for George. I'll let you see this because it's got the upkeep mine, the Dambuster bomb underneath. This is the Corgi die-cast scale model, which I've had for many years actually. I've had this for about, I don't know, 15 years, maybe more. Quite a while. So, in fact I had the box here. I thought I'd show you this because it's got some beautiful artwork on it I thought you might appreciate. Have a look at this. Look at that. Well, that's actually one of the paintings I featured in my montage there. Excuse me, I've still got my asthma cough from the... yeah, we've got some strange weather going on in the UK at the moment. Windy and cold. It feels like March rather than May. I've got a bit of a croaky voice, so I'll probably have to keep this short. Right, anyway, beautiful artwork. There's your Corgi Lancaster B3. I shall actually, I'll move that out of the way just for safety reasons. As I speak, I've got a bit of a squeaky voice, so you'll have to bear with me, I hope. Because I really wanted to film this video and have it go out at 9 PM on the 16th of May, which is the very moment when, on that fateful night at RAF Scampton, the base that was the home of the Dambusters, and other Lancaster squadrons, they literally fired the flares off to announce that they were about to take off on Operation Chastise. Now, I thought today what we'd do is, I'm not going to sort of retell the story, that would just be too boring and way too long. Most of you know the story pretty well. If any of you have seen the Dambusters movie from 1955, and I think nearly everybody, I don't know, I think 80% of the British population must have seen it. And I'm sure it's not far different in the Commonwealth and the USA. They're probably quite a high proportion of people have seen it too. By the way, talking about the USA and other nations, I thought I'd just mention this as well before we get going into the Dambusters. I was making, I think I've got an apology to make for calling the Stars and Stripes something else, which got me into a lot of trouble with people over in the States, so apologies. I was actually quoting another model, I'm not going to name him, but another modeler uses that phrase wrongly. So lessons are learned, we won't call it anything other than the Stars and Stripes. But hey, have a look at what we've got in terms of flags. Slightly ashamedly in this particular instance we've got the German flag, but listen, this it's in context, yeah. The German flag's in the background tonight for obvious reasons. Please don't be offended, I have many friends in Germany we have now. But in the context of the Dambusters, I've brought out the flags that are appropriate for the crews that took part in the raid on the Lancaster 617 Squadron. So we've got New Zealand, Canada, Australia, USA, and of course the Union flag for the Brits. And we will talk about the people who took part in the raid. Several from these nations, and we'll get into that in a bit more detail later on. My voice will hold out. In the meantime, to help my voice, I've got a drink tonight. I thought we ought to toast. We've got to toast that a lot of these brave men died, and in Germany a lot of perfectly innocent civilians died, including some prisoners of war, and there were, again we'll get into the detail later, but there were a lot of ladies died who were in a labour camp from Poland and from the Ukraine, unfortunately. So maybe I should have had my Ukraine flag in here and the Polish flag as well, but later, at a later date. Don't worry, we'll get into that. So, I thought a lot of people were sacrificed, knowingly and unknowingly, very sadly, in the cause of freedom, the advancement of freedom and getting the world's freedom back. So, I'm going to do two things. I'll put the light on to get some more light. There we go. That brings me to sharp relief. And then we're going to show you what I'm drinking, which is, again, we've got a new bottle of the wonderful Glenlivet, the Caribbean Reserve, which is the one that's aged in oak casks. And I know several of you wrote to me and said, oh, I've not seen this one. That looks absolutely fantastic. I know several of you have actually got out and bought this. I don't think those of you that did will be disappointed at all. So I'm going to have that to try and help my slight squeaky voice and throat. It's not my throat, it's because it's chesty cough and I can't get shut of it. But anyway, I've got a little bit of ice, which I'm not supposed to have, of course. But gin. Cheers, in memory of the Dambusters and the victims in the Ruhr Valley as well. And all those people that did sacrifice themselves one way or another. A remarkable story we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the movie. We're going to talk about, we've got a fantastic book to show you, and that's going to be quite visual, so I'm going to show you that, a lot of that. Also talk about George Johnny Johnson, who was the last British Dambuster to survive. And he had an American pilot, so it's a really good story, this one. We'll talk about that, and we're going to talk about the 55 movie. I've got some notes here. You'll have to forgive me from using notes today because there's so many facts and datas I want to talk about. And as I say, not going to retell the story, we're going to just get into it, but explaining to you that a lot of what I'm going to tell you today will be based on what you see in this book and what I have read in, you saw it, the Max Hastings CHASTISE, the Dambusters Raid, 1943, which is a superb book. Now, there are many great books, and I'm not pushing one above the other. If this whets your appetite a little bit, I recommend. There are many. I can think of 5 or 6 books, but there's Paul Brickhill's book. There's the one which I've just forgotten. There's another famous book that came out in the 70s, 80s. There's James Holland's book, of course. But I decided to go with Max Hastings because I felt I undersold him on the Falklands. The book he did on the Falklands, I didn't really give him enough prominence. So I've read via the audio book. I've gone right through his Chastise, and it is a work of, it's brilliant. It doesn't get carried away with fanciful notions in the way that some others, and I won't name one of the authors I've just mentioned, it sometimes gets carried away with conspiracy theories and all that stuff. It just sticks to the facts, and it's beautifully researched. If you want to read a book or listen to an audio book about the Dambusters Raid and really get a feel for it, Hastings' book is, basically like a documentary. It's absolutely fantastic. Still brings a tear to your eye near the end, when you realise the loss involved and the heroism and the innocents killed as well. Very, very moving. Anyway, I don't want to ramble on. So I'm drinking, I've got the Glenmorangie glass out again, but I'm drinking Glenlivet, and I'm sure they won't mind. Cheers. Cheers to all of you. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you find it moving and interesting. And I'll try and give you some facts and data. I've learned a tremendous amount. I'm going to pass on to you the things that I thought most interesting via these books about the Dambusters Raid and Operation Chastise, and just what a remarkable endeavour it was. So cheers to everybody. Here's to you, and here's to the memory of Guy Gibson, the Dambusters, and all the people who died in the process. Right then, so where do we begin? Well, I think I'll just go through my notes first of all, then we'll go into the pictorial book so you get some eye candy and things to look at that's interesting. A few things that have surprised me in this research I've done. I've been watching several documentaries, 6 or 7 I must have gone through, as well as the movie, of course. We'll talk about the movie later. In terms of the raid, a few facts and figures and things that might be of interest here. Starting with the personalities. So Guy Gibson and Barnes Wallis, along with Arthur Bomber Harris, who are probably 3 main characters that we sort of know quite well, or we think we do. I'm going to start with Guy Gibson. I'm going to choose my words carefully, but you really should go and read this Chastise book because it's all there. It's all there. Now, Guy Gibson was a remarkable guy. He was only 24 years old. I mean, it's amazing how young these men were. Hopwood and Maudsley, I think they were both 21. And Hopwood, who sadly didn't survive the raid, of course, he was considered by Guy Gibson to be the best pilot he got his hands on in 617 Squadron. And he considered Hopwood to be a better pilot even than himself. And sadly, for for several reasons I'll explain later, he didn't survive. But these guys were young, I mean, super young. They're flying, the responsibility on the shoulders of these guys. And they talked about Guy Gibson, some notes I made here. A natural leader, much older than his 24 years, and everybody said this about him. Now, when you come to the movie, of course, Guy Gibson is played brilliantly, frankly, by Richard Todd, who gives a beautiful performance. It's got to be said, it's amazing. Quite moving, absolutely. He nails it, he nails it. But there's a lot of things about Guy Gibson that I didn't know before, to be honest, until I did this research. And he was a very complicated character. And he wasn't necessarily the... He was a great warrior. He was actually a protege of Arthur Harris. They were... he sort of promoted Gibson because he saw him as a younger version of himself. Although later, at the end of after the Dambusters raid, there was a parting of the ways between these two men. Because Gibson started to realise that Arthur Harris's obsession with burning German cities, which is what he was, you know, people always say, I get a bit upset about this personally, because these brave men that were in Bomber Command don't get the recognition they deserve. There's been a lot of protest over the years, abuse aimed at them and their families. There was a lot of objection to them having this memorial, which is in just close to Park Lane. Is it Park Lane? Hyde Park, near Hyde Park, sorry. And I would urge you to go and see it. I actually took some photographs of it, and maybe should have included that. But it's a wonderful tribute showing these crews with their flying jackets on, about to get on another raid. Now, these men did not choose the raids that they were sent on. You know, you can say this about some of the Nazi World War II flyers as well. They didn't choose the targets, but they were very brave, and they had the highest attrition rate. You know, I think the only job more dangerous than being a Bomber Command aircrew was probably being on one of the convoys going across the Atlantic in sort of 1942, 43. Very dangerous, yeah. But it annoys me a little bit that these people get tarred with the same brush as Bomber Harris. Now, Bomber Harris, I'll say a few words about him, because I've learned a lot I didn't know. He was not a very nice man, frankly. Very interesting. I mean, he was a warrior, and it's very important to take it in context of the time. There's a lot of things about Harris and Gibson I'm going to talk about, which I've learned completely fresh. For example, Guy Gibson, I'm going to talk between Harris and Gibson, because they're almost two sides of the same coin in some respects. One's just much younger. Gibson was brought up in Rhodesia, and he had this. Everybody knows that he gave his dog this, what is now seen as a very controversial name, which I'm not going to use the word because it will offend some people, even though I think it's quite ridiculous. But I can understand why it upsets people, maybe. But you have to see everything in its context of its time, and this is the problem today. I'm not going off on a rant here, but people don't see things in context. You must see things in their proper context. Now, Gibson was, however, interesting. He was brought up in Rhodesia. He had a very dismissive manner with people of ethnic minority. He also had a dismissive attitude to women. He has a dismissive attitude to his subordinates, some of his subordinates. He treated them very poorly. And he was, again, you know, you can see why Harris and him got on, because he was a bit of a difficult character. However, and this is the important part of this part of the story, Winston Churchill himself said, famously, that nice men do not win wars. And Gibson and Harris had this thing, that they both had a streak of not being particularly nice men, actually. And so when you watch the Richard Todd portrayal of Gibson, he is a really sort of squeaky clean, true blue, whiter than white, really all-round sort of good guy. You know, and again, I'm using the parlance of the time. Almost an angel, and he wasn't like that at all, I can tell you. He wasn't. So, going back to my notes. He seemed much older than his 24 years. You know, he was a bit of a sexual predator, you know, with women. He was an adventurer, that was the term I think that Max Hastings used. A proper risk taker, and he had no concern about his own safety at all. and he was said to be a hazard to his own aircrew on board his own aircraft, because he would, and he did this on the Dams raid, of course. This is the reason he got the Victoria Cross. He flew alongside, giving cover, I think it was to, was it M for Mother, P for Popsy, and this is how he got the VC, because he put himself and all his men, a bit unfair on his men really, but put them to draw the flak from the other aircraft and give him a better chance. He was a risk taker in the, a proper hero. He was a hero. I am not trying to knock him at all. I'm putting context, and everything I'm telling you is not stuff I think. I wasn't there. I didn't know the man. Read Max Hastings' research. It's very interesting. Gibson was not this ultra white, clean, clean cut, heroic guy. He was a hero, definitely, and you need people like that in war. You need people that are going to be brutal and be perhaps a bit nasty. But he did his job beautifully, didn't he? He hated the enemy. Another point I made here. Hated the enemy well beyond the call of duty, is how Hastings put it. And he said he could be utterly brutal to any man he perceived to be not pulling his weight. And I think it was Anderson, one of the pilots on the raid, in the Chastise Dambusters raid, who got lost, had navigation problems and basically got lost. And clearly hadn't done his research and, didn't pull his weight. And he was off the squadron within 24 hours after the raid was completed. Certainly 36 hours. It was certainly basically a day after that Gibson had had his night's sleep. A day later, this guy was gone. So he was brutal to people, and he was not a compromiser. It was an interesting fact as well. We're getting to Barnes Wallis in a second, but Pickard was actually advised by another guy that was a bit of a hero of mine. Gibson was advised by Pickard, Charles Percy Pickard, who is famous for the raid a year later, the Amiens prison raid, where the mosquitoes breached the walls of the Amiens prison in Picardy in France. And apparently he was an advisor to Guy Gibson about his route into the dams, because he was a Wellington pilot, and of course he was also, I'm going off slightly on a tangent here, but bear with me. Pickard was in target for tonight, and I talked about Pickard in my Amiens prison raid video, which you can go and watch. I'll put a link at the end. And he was advising him about how to avoid the worst of the flak areas and the most defended areas on his run into the target across Holland. So it's quite interesting that these two very heroic guys, who both died because, of course, Gibson was, spoiler alert, Gibson died flying the Mosquito just as Pickard died flying the Mosquito in September 1944. Guy Gibson was on a raid. I think he was doing a bit of, I don't know if he was doing pathfinding or just doing a low-level reconnaissance, but he got shot down, and we didn't find this out until recent years. It was discovered that the ammunition that shot down Gibson's aircraft was sadly from a Lancaster who saw him coming out of the clouds and thought he was a Ju-88. And from a distance they do look similar, the Mosquito and the Ju-88. Excuse me for a second, I need a drink. Cheers. So, very sad end, and both got, died. Both these heroes died. Anyway, back to the story. Jumped ahead there. So, we come to Bomber Harris. Now, Bomber Harris was this belligerent man that was really, even Churchill didn't like him. He thought he was someone that was difficult to control, could see that he was a renegade. And it was the brutality of this firebombing campaign, which of course has been discredited in recent years. I'm not going to agree or disagree with that. I think it's very easy to judge things from an armchair 70, 80 years later. None of us can do that, and you've got to remember that excuse me, the Nazi regime, even if you're a German today, the Nazi regime was just evil, let's face it, no question. Only today do we have a parallel to it with what's going on in Ukraine, but we won't get into that because we've talked about that separately. This was a vicious, nasty regime. However, whether bombing its civilians in the way that it was done was the right way forward, I don't know, and I'm not here to judge that. But Harris was obsessed with this bombing campaign, this firebombing, and he wanted to basically annihilate the population in Germany, whereas others, including Barnes Wallis, wanted these strategic targets to knock out and remove the ability of the Nazi regime to make war and knock out their industry. So we come to Barnes Wallis. I'll come back to Bomber Harris because he pops up like a thorn in the side of everybody later on, but we'll get to that later. So you've got this brilliant inventor Barnes Wallis, truly genius of a man, who's invented all sorts of things, and including the Wellington bomber in the late 30s. He designed this geodetic aluminium frame construction, of course, which was very light and very, very strong. If you watch another video, I might have to refer you back to A Tale of Two Wellingtons, where I show a photograph of the famous Matchbox box art. Depicts, I think it's a raid on Duisburg or thereabouts in Germany. Wellington is hit by flak, kills the rear gunner, sadly, but a miracle that this aircraft didn't just break up on the spot, which most aircraft would have done. And thanks to this brilliant construction, it actually gets back. And I think the pilot got a VC for it from memory. Absolutely brilliant piece of airmanship, and Barnes Wallis's design proven beyond all doubt. Fantastic designer. So Wallis has got this obsession with dams, wanting to break the Ruhr dams, knowing that they are critical to production in the Ruhr Valley. They provide hydroelectric power. They also provide all the water needed for steel and, above all, coal mining. And that's a big part of the German war effort then. So I have to say that in the film he is portrayed, I think this is the best part of the film actually, Sir Michael Redgrave portrays Barnes Wallis brilliantly, and everybody, even Wallis, said, yes, you absolutely nailed it. It was a bit like I talked about in previous videos, when Niki Lauda was played by Daniel Bruhl in Rush. It's similar to that. He absolutely nails it. Sir Michael Redgrave. You within minutes you just believe that he is Barnes Wallis. It's so well portrayed. He even looks like him. Anyway, it has to be said that he was a true gentleman, Wallis. And it's actually mentioned in Max Hastings' book, and he says that when the crews are going to go on the operation, I'm going to have to take a cough sweet. You'll have to bear with me. I think the alcohol's not helping enough. When they go on the operation, the crews of the Lancasters can't believe what a genial gentleman that Barnes Wallis was. And they said that they couldn't get their heads around sort of squaring the circle of this gentle giant of a man that's clearly a genius in the engineering field, that's going to bring this horrible destruction down upon parts of Germany, And they really find it difficult to sort of contemplate this. But Wallis is certainly well portrayed in the film. One of the things that's not accurate in the film, it has to be said about Wallis, is basically the resistance that he got. They do portray problems with, obviously, the chairman at Vickers. He was a problem. And others, including Bomber Harris. Yes, that was true. But he didn't get the complete resistance that it makes it look like it's just him against the world. There were plenty of people, especially the head of the Royal Navy. He was very keen on the bouncing bomb principle. The highball, which had seemed demonstrated by the mosquitoes. And of course they were very keen to use this weapon against Tirpitz and other big German capital ships. I'm just going to have a drink. My voice is cracking here. I've postponed making this go over yourself. I've postponed it day after day after day for over a week because I wasn't 100% fit. I'm still not 100% fit, but I had to do it and get it out to you on the right day. I think I owe it to to do a tribute, I owe it to the Dambusters for that. So please bear with me a little bit because it's a bit croaky in the throat. I feel fine in myself. Oh, that's good medicine. Where was I? So yeah, he didn't get the resistance quite as badly as they portray in the film. It doesn't lie, it just perhaps exaggerates a bit. And one of the things about, go back to cross-referencing with Gibson again, was that when Gibson's dog is killed the day before the raid, the person who was actually more upset, I mean, it does portray very accurately Gibson's reaction when he sees the scratches on the door. It's all true, that. Excuse me. That is all true, but Barnes Wallis was absolutely mortified when he heard that the dog had died, because he was worried about the effect it would have on Gibson. And he was really worried it was going to demotivate him. And he'd been such a keen supporter of the project, and he was so up for it and so helpful to Wallis, that Wallis thought it was a bad omen. So especially the day before the raid, you know. So he was really worried, and he was worried whether they should postpone it or whatever. But in the end, of course, it went ahead, and we know the results. Not everybody was so keen, though. One crew, it was actually Bill Astle's B for Baker, which unfortunately did not survive the raid and hit power lines and blew up. But worst of all, deposited its upkeep bomb that did not explode in the rest of the conflagration. Actually, the Germans got their hands on it, and they had a Canadian chap. He had a Polish name, forgot his name, and he actually wrote on the upkeep mine, "Never has so much been expected of so few," parodying Churchill's famous phrase. And he chalked it on the upkeep mine. Well, unfortunately, they didn't make it, so that was a bad omen as well. And of course, the upkeep mine itself, that led to the development of Tallboy by Barnes Wallis, and ultimately the Grand Slam was the even bigger version. And I got told off for this by a few of you, quite rightly, because I got my facts wrong when I did my Lancaster review recently, and I hadn't got to the stage of doing all research. So obviously the Tirpitz was hit by Tallboy, and Grand Slam is the one they used against the Bielefeld Viaduct and other, also the canals in Germany as well. Anyway, on to the raid. I'm going to talk about the raid a little bit. I'm going to talk about the film. So, and you'll forgive me for doing it in this order. It's going to be a little bit back and forth, but I just relaying a few facts and figures. So you got Les Munro, the New Zealander, who was a brilliant pilot, by the way. He was very highly rated. This is a guy that was so skilled that he'd flown underneath another Lancaster at about 100 feet after returning from, or on the way back from a raid in Germany, which scared the bejesus out of the other pilots. He's a very skilled guy. He was very unlucky. He got hit. He came in over the, I think it was Texel and was it Vlieland? Islands on the Dutch coast, and he got really badly hit by flak, and they took an absolute pounding. It knocked out his compass, it knocked out his radio, and he couldn't communicate with anybody else. So they had to abandon because they couldn't have any contact, couldn't navigate properly. And Les Munro was one of the best pilots on the raid, and he had to return home, so that must have been very frustrating for him. And then, of course, on the main raid, you got the Mona raid, you got G for George, Guy Gibson's plane, who did a pretty good job of releasing their bomb, but it did fall a little bit short. Didn't quite get to the wall of the dam, which unfortunately is why it didn't have much impact. And then you got Hopgood. Now, Hopgood, I mentioned earlier, was one of the youngest pilots, but considered by Gibson to be the best one. And they were hit. They were hit by anti-aircraft flak on the Mona, on the approach. Already, I think they had an engine fire, and this is M for Mother. They overshot. They actually released their bomb a fraction too late. So the opposite of Gibson. So we haven't got one on target yet. It overshot, and of course exploded and killed everybody, blowing up the Lancaster in the valley below where the power station was. Destroyed the power station, destroyed the Lancaster with a blast. Then you got Mickey Martin, Australian, and he was another real larger-than-life character. And he's the one that Is Mickey Martin the one that was the non-drinker? I think he is. But he was a very good pilot. Have I got that right? I'm just trying to remember them. It's so hard to hold this in your head. There's so many facts, it's incredible. I think he is. And he is the one, P for Popsy. He gets, manages to drop his bomb. But it doesn't blow. He's the first one that gets it right on target, really. But the dam doesn't breach. So they have to carry on. A for Apple then also manages to get a shot in, which I think is one that veered off slightly. Wasn't quite as central as it might have been, but again, it still won't blow. And then finally, J for Johnny drops his, and this is when so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bombs. 4 were on target, there or thereabouts, some were short. But J for Johnny's, and this is of course, not Maudsley, you see his face now. The memory's gone, folks, just bear with me because I do know this guy. Here we go. David Maltby. Maltby, who's another friend of Gibson, and he's also pretty young. I think he's only about 21 as well, quite a handsome young lad. He's the one that nails it, and the dam breaches, and all hell begins. So then, of course, they move off to the Ada Dam, which is the target number 2. No flight there, but horrendous terrain. I mean, it's like you've got to do like a dog leg there. There's pictures I'll show you later. You have to do this incredible turning over the castle and then dive down to the lake, then do this 90-degree port turn again to be on target. It's not easy. So Z for Zebra, he overshoots with his bomb, and he gets damaged by the explosion and later crashes not long after. L for Leather, he gets his bomb on target, but it doesn't blow the dam. And then N for Nuts, Knight with a K. He's the pilot that manages to, he pulls it off and he breaches the dam and it goes big time, you know. Again, catastrophic damage. But this is, you know, it's taking 25 minutes to half an hour to get these dams to go. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. It must have been frustrating. And of course, they keep transmitting the code saying G Donner, telling them back at in Grantham, where you've got Barnes Wallis pacing around with Arthur Harris, and Arthur Harris was dead against this raid. He hated the concept. He didn't trust inventors and didn't trust Wallis. He said that the whole thing was absolute nonsense, and he was really against it. However, his superiors were quite keen, and so he went along with it. And of course, when it was successful at the end, he famously says to Barnes Wallis, in the film, which is completely accurate, he says, "When you came to me, I didn't believe a word you said. Now you could sell me a pink elephant." And but the annoying thing about Harris is, we can joke about it, but he takes a lot of credit then. And then it's like, this is all my idea. The biggest problem, which we'll get into here in the book, why didn't they follow it up? Not with another raid with the upkeep mine, because that wouldn't work anymore. They put up balloons and everything. But they should have just, everybody thinks, Max Hastings covers this in the book, why on earth they didn't just do a conventional high level, maybe using Tallboy, attack on the repair work that was going on, because they repaired it in about 10-12 weeks, both of them. Absolutely crazy. And they just left them unmolested to repair it, and they could have easily attacked the repairs and stopped that repair. Very strange that it wasn't followed up. And the other point that was made by Max Hastings also is that, given that they had starved the Ruhr Valley, and we'll get into the damage a bit more later, but given that they'd starved the Ruhr Valley of water, well, not at first, they flooded it, of course, you know, and I said that there was these poor women in this prison camp, and there was a total of 1,600 people, they reckon, lost their lives. Of about 850 of those were in the prison camp. Absolutely horrendous. And because of this, then there was then subsequently a lack of water, because they've lost it, you know, it's all flowed away. They could have done this firebombing if they wanted to, whether you agree with it or not, it's up to you, but they could have, it stopped the German fire service from being able to put out the fires. They had no water. So if they'd actually followed it they didn't really maximise this, and I'm talking strategically now, I'm not talking about humanitarian stuff, we'll get into that. But from a strategic point of view, they just then left this success of the dams like unfinished business, like it was a big, you know, one-hit wonder. Didn't follow it up, didn't maximise the opportunity it created. A bit strange, really. Anyway, then finally we have got the Sorpe raid. Now there is a new, you'll have seen a slide at the end of my little presentation, there's a new movie out called Raid on Sorpe Dam. And of course this is the, there was 2 aircraft that attacked Sorpe Dam. The first one was our American friend Joe McCarthy was the pilot, and he was, I'm trying to remember if it was Joe McCarthy. This is where I get them mixed up. My memory's failing me. Was it Joe McCarthy who was the non-drinker? No, it wasn't. It was our Australian friend. Yeah, Mickey Martin, I think, was the non-drinker. Joe McCarthy, American, I think from New Jersey. And you've got Johnny Johnson, George Johnny Johnson. He's the bomber. Now this is where it gets a bit weird, the whole story, if you don't know it really in detail. Here we've got a different design of dam, and we'll get into the pictures in a minute, but instead of having a steep, almost vertical wall, with nothing on one side, water on the other, this is an earthen dam, so it's like this, and it has a central core in the middle. Very hard to breach with anything. I don't know, and there was a lot of comment afterwards saying, why did we even try? Upkeep mine and upkeep the bomb, the Dambuster bomb. It is basically a mine. It is a mine, basically. It's an air-launched mine. It's like a depth charge, really, in effect. It has the hydrostatic pistols which activate it at, I think it's 30 feet down. So it's a bit like a depth charge. Big one, though. And of course, the principle of the whole thing was the idea that if it falls, it has this backspin, and the backspin makes it continue and then push against the wall of the dam, and still backspinning it clings to the wall and falls down against it, and then when it detonates, the shock wave that is created sort of reflects back. You get like a double shock wave effect. Initial shock wave into the wall, and then the second shock wave punches through, and this is what happened, of course. But yeah, it's a strange one. So they have to have a completely different approach in terms of how they drop this bomb, mine, depth charge. This time they don't spin it at the Sorpe Dam because there's no point. They fly directly down the dam and release it right basically on the edge of the dam. And it drops, and then they want to detonate it on the top of the dam, basically. It was never going to work, was it? I mean, I'm no engineer, but you only have to understand that once you understand how the upkeep works, you can't see how this was ever going to work, and it didn't. So they were on target. They released their weapon, Joe McCarthy, our American friend, with Johnny Johnson, and then later you had F for Freddy, which came along about 2 hours later. And he also had a direct hit, but he didn't breach it. He just wouldn't go. He just wouldn't go. The other things to bear in mind, transit to and from the target was very problematic. Too low, and this happened to one of the outbound Sorpe Dam wave. He actually hit the sea, just skinned the sea, and it ripped the upkeep mine out of its housing from the calipers and straight into the ocean. And he had to abandon and fly back. But he didn't get a rollicking from Guy Gibson. He actually was very sympathetic, and he said he actually nearly did the same thing himself. He was flying so low at one point, it was about 20 feet off the deck. And you've only got to have a big wave, and bang, and you've lost it. If you fly too high, you're going to get the German fighters down on you. So they had to fly at about, under 200 feet. They flew over the water on the dams at 60 feet. Of course, this was supposed to be 150 originally, and you'll see this in the movie, got reduced to 60 because that was the only way they could effectively do it and not have the heavy shock impact on the bomb, or depth charge on mine, upkeep. And another thing that seems strange to me, that they loaded all the guns on the aircraft. They were very actively shooting up the German flag, but they insisted on loading all the guns with tracer bullets, which for shock and awe effect, you know, to try. Well, that was a stupid idea if you think about it, because it means that as they're coming toward you, they can see you. They can see exactly where the aircraft is via its tracer. I don't see the logic of that. I don't think that in the middle of the night you're going to either get shot at or you're not. It's not going to frighten people. You know, I just don't see the logic of it. And they said that only 15% of Lancaster crews ever survived bailing out. And one crew, the ones that were lost, and by the way, of course, in total there were 19 Lancasters in the raids, of which 8 were lost, of 53 men. One of them, a chap called Tees, T-E-E-S, he was the tail gunner in one of these that went down and blew up, but he survived. He was taken prisoner, but he was badly burned, but he actually survived the war. Incredible story, really. And I just want to talk about the movie, really, before we get into the picture book. A few things you may or may not know. Robert Shaw, did you notice that Robert Shaw has a cameo in this film? He plays the navigator at the start, and at the start of the operation. He's also seen in the briefing. Also starring in the film was Patrick McGoohan, who of course was in The Prisoner TV series and Braveheart the movie, and George Baker, who played Maltby, who's the one that breached the Murner Dam. And George Baker, of course, has been in 2 James Bond films. He was in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. He was the heraldry expert in London. Was it Switzerland? I forget. But he was the heraldry expert that George Lazenby went to see. And of course he was the chief naval officer at the beginning of The Spy Who Loved Me, when they're explaining that they've lost their nuclear submarine, etc, etc. A couple of cameos there. Richard Todd. Right, Richard Todd plays Guy Gibson, of course. He gives a brilliant performance. But, as I mentioned, one that actually, when you learn more, Todd's performance is... I mean, that film is brilliant. It does portray, and we'll get into 1 or 2 things that are not good, but overall, it's a masterpiece. If you want to learn about the Dambusters, it gives you 90% of what you need in terms of accuracy. But he was very generous towards Gibson. He plays him as a very clean-cut young chap, and he was much more complicated than that. He was very overbearing, very uncompromising, brutal, and very humorless. They say he was a very miserable guy, actually. He was very bit of a manic depressive, you know, he had quite a lot of demons. Whereas Todd is very charming in the film, of course. The special effects in the film aren't great, as we know, especially when the water splash effects, when the walls of the dams are hit. Very poor indeed, got to say. The Lancasters in the film have got the wrong later paddle type propeller blades. The explosions weren't very good in the effects either. But the worst thing about the film, really, I suppose, is the upkeep bomb itself, because it was still secret in 1955 and the MOD wouldn't let them show it. They wouldn't let them show the shape of it or the calipers or any of that stuff. So they had this great big sort of spherical looking mock-up, like sort of a shroud that is used on those aircraft. We'll see the photographs in a minute. And it remained classified, fully classified until 1973. Now Revell, going back to the models, Revell had a kit out in 1966, I think it was. And that's probably as a legacy of the fact that in Germany it was more common knowledge and they weren't subject to the Official Secrets Act because of this aircraft that had crashed. I think it was B. Baker, where they retrieved the upkeep mine. And it said this is, you know, because of this Official Secrets Act being still in force, that's the reason that Tamiya and Airfix produced their kits around about 1973 to 75. So there you go. One of the other things that was silly, perhaps the silliest thing of all in that film, is the where it shows Guy Gibson and his colleague, I think was it Maltby or Hopgood, going to the theatre watching the dancing girls, you know, West End dancing girls who are very impressive. And he notices, and his mate's looking at the girl's legs, and he's looking at the spotlights, and then it sort of gives the impression that he comes up with this idea. That's a load of rubbish. Ministry of Aircraft Production actually came up with that. One of their researchers at Farnborough came up with the concept. Nothing to do with Guy Gibson at all. He was far too busy with his operational flying to worry about that. You know, he wasn't the inventor. A bit of a silly thing, really. The after raid footage, I think, was very good, but far too brief, and it doesn't go into this detail about all these grievous losses in the Ruhr Valley. You know, towns and villages were just swept away by the deluge of water. You know, millions and millions of gallons of water just swept down the valley. A complete tsunami, literally. And yeah, I think the ending of the film is very poignant. Doesn't say anything about what happens to Guy Gibson. As I say, it doesn't show the Ruhr catastrophe. It just sort of, he walks off, doesn't he? Saying Gibson says to Barnes Wallis he's going to write some letters to the people that were lost, you know, the parents and the relatives. Very moving, very moving. It's a great film. You haven't seen the Dambusters. If you can just forgive its special effects, which are a bit crude, don't let that bother you too much. Just focus on the story, because it does tell it pretty well. And just the fact that so few of them didn't make it back, and even Dingy Young, he was the guy, wasn't he, in the P for Popsy, was it? Yeah, I think so. He didn't make it back. His very good friend, and they were shot down just north of Amsterdam, right over the coast. And of course, there's a photo in here. You see the Lancaster, what's left of it, swept back onto the shore by the tide. And it doesn't really, it doesn't have time in the film to go into all that detail, I suppose, but it was a very good representation of what happened, and I commend the Dambusters movie to you. Now it's time to have a look at some pictures. You've heard enough of me talking. I'll probably go a bit quiet, because I probably need to, because my voice is cracking. Let's have a look at this wonderful book. I think you can really, incredibly strongly recommend this book. The Dambusters, Breaking the Great Dams of Germany, 16th to 17th of May, 1943, by Jonathan Falconer, forward by Richard Todd himself. Absolutely brilliant. And that is actually Joe McCarthy's aircraft, isn't it? Because there's Joe McCarthy and there's our friend George Johnny Johnson. Right, so you've heard from me. I'm going to let you see the pictures, because I think that it's important to look at this. Here's a photo now. This is a photo of the aftermath, taken from the RAF reconnaissance. 2 months after the dams, showing the completely drained reservoir, just gone. All the water's gone down the valley, and yeah, they probably had to let it drain so they could start the reconstruction work. And then it talks about, look at this, here's that shot of that's like the Myrna, totally breached. Very powerful weapon, wasn't it? Yeah, we won't go into all the preamble stuff. The Impossible Dream, here we go. The Lancaster by Avro. AV Row. And I should remind you, my mother used to work for AV Row during the Second World War. She got her first job, I think it was, AV Row, 1944, working for Roy Chadwick, the chief designer, would you believe? This is true. She was only typist in the typing pool, but she used to type letters for Roy Chadwick, and I think she actually met Barnes Wallis very briefly, and he was going to a meeting with Chadwick. I think she offered him some tea. Amazing. And at that time, the Lancasters were actually made at the Yeadon factory near Bradford. And this is the factory that famously had this earthenware, they put like earth on the roof. Big factory, huge field. And they were so worried that the Germans were going to bomb it that they decided to disguise it and make it look like a field. And this is where they had these plastic cows that they used to move around every hour or two. They'd move the cows around. So it looked like cows grazing in a field. And it was never bombed. It was never bombed, amazing. So where my mum worked, Avro was the headquarters at Woodford near Manchester, and she told me that the Lancasters there they would come in for repair work. It was like a repair depot. So when they had to have major repairs, they'd be flown into, if they could fly, they'd fly them into Woodford. Anyway, enough of my family history. On with the show. So, developing the bouncing bomb. Here's Barnes. This is actually after the war. A bit closer to this. And there he is, the man himself. What a clever man he was. And you got a pre-war picture of the Mona Dam before it got blown up. And then there's a bit of background data here about the R&D that went into preparing to test the bombs. So, a 50th scale model of the Mona Dam was painstakingly constructed at Garston near Watford for experimental purposes. And there is the scale model. So they also built a scale model of the Nantygrow Dam in Wales. And then, of course, they did this famous testing at the actual dam itself, where they demonstrated the effect of Wallis's theory, whereby he said that Guy Gibson kind of proved his theory, didn't he, on the night. Gibson's bomb fell short and detonated dead on target, but short. Dead centre. Did not breach the dam, and they were only thinking they may only need one bomb to do it. So that was shattered, wasn't it? But it didn't get to the wall of the dam, you see. Whereas the later one, N for Nuts, wasn't it? N for Nuts, Knight's aircraft. He did get there. He did get it right against the wall, and this is what it's showing here. That basically they demonstrated that when you put that charge right against the dam, it actually had this percussion effect and amplified the shockwave. So here we go. Here's the theory. Oh, let's zoom you in. See me. Here we go. Point of release 400 to 450 yards away, and it shows the backspin, backspinning to make it drop down. And then it drops to the optimum depth for the explosion, and then kaboom. And then here's the Teddington National Physical Laboratory. Of course, this is shown actually the real location. The actual filmed on location in the movie. Some of the other scientists. Here's the 3 hydrostatic pistols shown in the upkeep mine design. And here's the first prototype on the Lancaster. And then here we go. This is our friend David Maltby, who's played by George Baker in the film, and Guy Gibson, who of course played by Richard Todd in the film. Maltby, there he is. He's the guy that actually breached the Mona Dam. It's his upkeep that did the job. And then we've got pictures of Gibson, and then Les Knight's Royal Australian Air Force Squadron. He's got his team there. Training for the Ruhr dams at the Derwent Reservoir in Derbyshire. Here we go. Lancaster shot. And then you've got all these shots. I'm going to zoom you in for this. All these shots of the target dam. So here we've got the Mona, and here's the Sorpe. And then they've got these fantastic models. These are all models now you're looking at. Absolutely incredible. Scale model of the Ada Dam. Now this is the one that didn't come through until the day of the operation. So they didn't have much time to actually study it, unfortunately. But you can see there, this is the dam here where my thumb is. That's the actual dam there. So what they had to do, they had to come in and do this 90-degree port turn diving down. Very difficult. Very difficult. There's the famous, as seen in the film, the famous handheld wooden dam site. And here's the first of the Lancasters with its new upkeep drive system for spinning the weapon. He had to spin it at 500 RPM, which if you think about it, that is damn fast, actually. For something that weighed 9,250 pounds, which is a lot of weight. And then we've got a lot of pictures of... Here we go. This is at Reculver on the Kent coast. Doing testing, dropping the bomb. And then, as you saw, is from that still at the beginning. Wallis is waving his arms around in delight. And then we had a few mishaps then. So here we've got Les Munro releasing his bomb a little bit too low and knocking half of the tailplane, affected his elevator very, very badly. You see some damage there. Bits coming off here. Look at that. Some of the inert, this is in 1975, they're using a Jolly Green Giant helicopter borrowed from the Americans, from Lakenheath or Mildenhall, I think. And they've recovered a couple of the old upkeep mines, look, from the sea. Incredible. There's another upkeep being dropped. It's the only fully armed upkeep that was spun and dropped before Chastise. And there's a very famous photo, which I don't think is in this book actually, of it actually being filmed from Gibson's aircraft. And here is Gibson, getting ready for his raid. I mean, he must have nerves of steel, this man. I think he's only 24 years old. It's asking a lot of young people this, isn't it? Absolutely crazy, really. There he is with his team. And then here we've got, I think that's, who's that? Harold Wilson's crew, not to be confused with the Prime Minister, future Prime Minister. Yeah, that's Wilson's flight. They look young as well, don't they? And then we've got several here. Bob Hutchinson with Gibson. This is Gibson and his crew about to get on board. Gibson at the top of the steps. Oops. Now then, now we get into the raid. This is McCarthy's. This is McCarthy's team. So they were. I'm going to have to refer back to my notes because my memory is fading me here. T for Tommy. I think it was T. T for Tommy. You got McCarthy there. You've got. Here's McCarthy. Fine American pilot, and here's Johnny Johnson, the bomb aimer. And it says, left to right, you've got Johnny Johnson, Dave McLean, R. Batson, front gunner, Joe McCarthy, pilot, Radcliffe, the engineer, and the wireless operator, Sergeant Eaton. Wow. Chastise gets underway, and everybody talks about how they struggled to get off the ground because of the weight of the thing, and they were fully fueled. It wasn't easy. And here is the route to the target from Scampton. So you can see that the ones going to the Sorpe took this rather strange, to try and confuse the Germans, they took this northern route, but they took them over these islands, and of course this is where they got H for Harry got abandoned. This is the one that lost its bomb over the sea. W. Willie got severe flak damage and aborted, and that's Les Munro's aircraft, I think, was Harry, H for Harry. And then you can see several of them are actually portrayed here as being shot down on the way in. Look. First wave and third wave going the south route. Ada Dam breached at 01:56 hours. And that's exactly an hour after they breached the Mona Dam, so it was 1 hour later. Incredible, really. Return loss, M for mother lost, Z zebra lost. A apple lost. A apple was Hotwood's. Sorry, Dingy Young's aircraft. Sorry. And then we can see here this rather. The Mona is a little bit less complicated as a run-in. There's a bit more room. It's a bit bigger than the other reservoirs, but it's not as high. Nice artwork here. Let's do this one back. Beautiful piece of art here, look at that one. This is the Mona. Because there are lots of Germans just firing. Basically, that's showing the breach, isn't it? So that's N for nuts has just let his bomb go. P Popsy, and that's N nuts. It is said that it's possible that P Popsy's bomb may have actually caused a partial breach, but it didn't go, and that maybe if they'd waited a few more minutes, it would have gone anyway. It's a fine line, isn't it? You can't hang around there too long, but at the same time, you don't want to waste bombs, and you know, you can't be flying around waiting and hoping it's going to go. It's difficult. Very tricky operation, but look at this. Next morning, we have the photo reconnaissance mosquito flies over. Clearly seeing there's a major dam breach, there you go. And then over here we've got the Ada approach, and you can see exactly what I was talking about. This is tricky. So you've got Waldeck Castle, and then you have to make this, and this is steep terrain here. I think it's 500 to 600 feet. It's really steep. You've got to dive right down over this spur at Hammersburg, and then get right down onto like very difficult approach because of the steepness of the valley. Awfully difficult. In fact, that's what the approach looked like. So you've got to fly over this spur and slot yourself to get to the dam here. Not easy. It took 3 upkeeps. 3 upkeeps effectively for the Ada and 4 for the Mona. And then here we go, attack on Sorpe Dam. Now, before I forget, something I should discuss. As we're on the Sorpe, this is the one that was not breached. There's this new film out called Attack on Sorpe Dam, which has been endorsed by people like Airfix Hornby. I was actually invited to go and see this film when it was in Bristol. I'm afraid it wasn't really very convenient on Saturday night, so I wasn't able to go. But basically, it recreates the attack, which not many people know much about, because it's not really featured in the Dambusters movie. They focus on the Mona and the Ada. And it's from the memoir, if you like, memoirs of George Johnny Johnson. So it's very accurate. And the flying scenes and all the action scenes, they recreate it all with CGI. Yes, I've seen it. It's not that spectacular to look at, but very nice that they recreated this. Something new. It's been shown at Imperial War Museum sites over the weekend as well. It's going to be on TV before too long, I'm sure of it. So I thought I'd mention that. You probably saw the still, it's the last still on my little montage at the beginning. I think we'll end with that montage, by the way. I think we'll play it again at the end, okay? Let's just zoom in though and have a look at this tricky and difficult, almost impossible mission that they gave them to attack the Sorpe Dam. So you have to come in over the village of Lancashire, you have to avoiding the church steeple, which is really in the way, and then fly parallel basically to the dam wall itself. Very, very difficult. Here we go. That's tricky, that's putting it mildly. And then you see the design of it here. It's just an earth bank, and there's no easy way to breach it, and it's the same on the other side. So it's like a pyramid almost. Very, very difficult. And Brown, he had they both had direct hits. They were both successful, both McCarthy and Brown's aircraft, but it just wouldn't go, you know. Then here we've got, whoops, come back a bit for this one. Some really good diagrams that the Germans made. They inspected the upkeep mine, and then they've got all the German writing. This is worrying, isn't it? Just how thoroughly the mine was examined can be appreciated from these scale drawings of the British spinning water bomb produced by the Germans. Oh dear. Hydrostatic pistols, there we go, they're clearly seen. Oh, look at that, British spinning water bomb it says. Oh, they've sussed it out within a week or two, haven't they? And of course they had the technology, and here is the photograph. This is the captured one. And this was, I think, E. Edward, another one that collided with electricity pylons. and crashed at Haldenherken in Holland, and the upkeep rolled clear of the wreckage. Miraculously failed to go off. What a shame. This chap who looks a little bit like Adolf Hitler in his younger days, worryingly. And of course its secrets were then known by the Germans, but they didn't actually make their own version of it. And this sadly is the wreckage of A for Apple, Henry Dinghy Young, Guy Gibson's closest friend in the squadron. Yeah, him and Hopwood were considered the finest pilots apart from himself, and they just ran out of luck. They were just shot down just north of Amsterdam, right on the coast. And we've got this painting of, this one is Alpha Leather, who got a hit on the dam, didn't he? Racing home low level over the windmills. And then the aftermath. Après moi le déluge. Look at the state of it. Look at that breach. I mean, that's the Mona. That's a massive breach, isn't it? Look at the effect. The damage. I mean, these are the anti-torpedo buoys and netting. Which is all just scrap at the side, really, isn't it? Look at that. Amazing. Here's the photo reconnaissance of Spitfire, Mark 9. And then you've got some quite interesting photos of the various different angles. Look at that, look at the damage on the parapet. Wow. Incredible. Ada, this is the Ada after it's been breached. Slightly off centre, wasn't it, the breach? Did the job though. There's a close-up. Bring you in for this one. Yes, that's quite a spectacular result. And then you get into the effect it had, you know. Completely filling the valley below. Look. Incredible. Water pipes used to feed the turbines at the power station that once stood in the shadow of the Mona Dam, smashed by Hopgood's upkeep weapon and then washed away by the raging floodwaters. Wow. Debris litters the floor of the compensating basin in the shadow of them, what's left of the Mona Dam. Look at that. Man standing there for scale. Wow. On the other side it's got this is this is quite sad. These are marking the spot where the Russian prisoner of war camp was. Oh dear, washed away by the deluge. And at B was the road and rail bridge. Oh dear. Look at that, the entire valley's just watered away. This is the railway line, and the railway bridge completely demolished, just total wreckage. Look at the way the valley was flooded. Oh. Luftwaffe airfield even was flooded, 15 miles southwest of Cassel. Eesh. Look at the damage it did. Now you can see the splashes on the Sorpe that didn't breach, but you can see the damage from the explosion, the splash effect, and the debris that was thrown over it. It was certainly damaged. You can see the damage there. See that? Yeah. Interesting. Look at that house completely demolished by the water. God, unbelievable. Just swept away. And here you can see the repairs going on and completed then. 11 weeks it took. 11 weeks after they started work it was fixed. But they never bothered to raid it. It's really strange. This is all photos after the war. Anyway, there we go. So, remarkable. remarkable. All the pictures of it, how it looks today, all peaceful again. And then there's the famous Daily Telegraph, a really good newspaper in Britain, our finest newspaper. And it shows here the actual headline the day after, Tuesday, May the 18th. Fantastic. RAF blow up 3 key dams in Germany. Fantastic. And then the aftermath. Debriefing. Arthur Bomber Harris at the background, look. Top left. And you've got interesting photo. If you look at this photograph, Cyril Anderson is the one on the extreme left. He's the one that got lost. And Gibson fired him out of the squadron. And he died. Only, I think, 8 days later he died in a raid over Germany in an ordinary Lancaster. So he was kind of disgraced, really. And then here you've got, is it the King? Visit of the King, I think it is. Yeah, the King shares a joke with Guy Gibson. Oops. Actually, he's on the, not good actually. The King is right on the crease of the page. There's Gibson, King on the right. Not the best photograph, that, was it? And then he goes on a tour of the base to meet the successful crews. Then you've got Gibson's team after the event, and of course Gibson gets awarded his VC, and you can actually see it here. Oops, there. That's the VC stripe bar. Yes. Various pictures then of the crews and the visit of the King, and here we go. The Victoria Cross. And of course they also gave out DSO for McCarthy, Maltby, all the ones who basically breached, you know, had their bomb on target. They all got DSO. There's a lot of awards given out. Oh my word, absolutely amazing. Look at that. Even the tail gunner got an award. There's the King again, talking to the various members of the crew. Better shot of the King. Some of the men that made it happen. Here we go. Oops. Sorry. Getting a bit carried away in my reading here. Barnes Wallis. I think you got a CBE for it, didn't he? Guy Gibson, here he is. Mick Martin. Sir Ralph Cochrane. Vice Marshal of the Royal Air Force. He was quite keen on it actually. Arthur Harris. Station Commander at Scampton, Richard Todd, during the filming of the Dambusters movie 1954. And then we've got various other people in the background who were involved. And then finally, the Dambusters movie, it's the one you've all been waiting for. Making the Dambusters. Of course, it was based on the Dambusters by Paul Brickhill, his book. And also Enemy Coast Ahead, which was Guy Gibson's book. And then here are these very weird looking mocked up Lancasters. Which doesn't really look right, does it? Doesn't really look right. Yeah, they look very strange. Look like a pregnant guppy fish or something, to be honest. You see it really clearly there, can't you? That's not good. No, it doesn't look correct at all. Much worse than the real thing, in fact. And here we've got Michael Redgrave as Barnes Wallis and Patrick Barr as Mutt Summers when he gets off in the Mosquito to do the testing. Various shots here. There's Scampton. Briefing room at Scampton in the main hall. This is where they replicate the foliage that Richard Todd, Guy Gibson has picked up on his tail during one of the training missions. And then Sir Michael Redgrave is at Teddington at the experimental laboratory. And then the very tense moments when they're waiting for good news and none comes through. And it was said, wasn't it, that it's been said by Max Hastings, in fact, he said that never has there been such a swing of pessimism and feeling of failure to complete euphoria in any mission than there was in the Dambusters. Because normally, they don't find out for a day or two, and they don't know whether they've succeeded or not, or how much damage has been done. Here it's black and white. You either breach the dam or you haven't, and they got that. And Barnes Wallis was almost in tears. Now he was very, very upset at the end when he realised he'd lost 53 men. And they say he never actually got over it. He always felt guilty the rest of his life, genuine guilt. He never came to terms with the fact that his invention got 53 young men to lose their lives, not to mention all those innocent civilians and POWs and people that were swept away in the flood. But I suppose that was always going to happen to a certain degree, unfortunately. But yeah, there was you had Bomber Harris shaking his head, I told you so, and then suddenly, oh, Wallis, you're a genius, now you can sell me a pink elephant. Anyway, you saw it in the film. And that's pretty much exactly how it happened. Here's when they're giving the briefing before the raid, and they got the models out. Very good models. I think these are actually the real models that we use as well. Look at that. That's incredible. And there is George Baker, I mentioned, who plays Maltby. George Baker, who's in the Bond film. Anybody else we can see? Robert Shaw there? Can't see Robert Shaw in that shot. And this is when his Batman has come to tell him the sad news about his dog has died and been run over outside. Now here's another fact that you won't probably know that I learned. There was a bit of a controversy around this, apart from the obvious one. But apparently Guy Gibson went up to a carpenter at Scampton and said to him, my dog's been killed on the road. I want you to make him a coffin. I want you to do it now. And apparently this carpenter said, I'm sorry, sir, I won't be doing that. I've got urgent work to do on a couple of the aircraft that have just come in from a raid that have got bad damage to the wood areas inside, where behind one of the bulkheads and where they have the map tables. I've got work to do that's very urgent, sir. I'm sorry. He said, you will do it. Apparently he had a real big row with this guy. And then you saw in the movie that he went and asked this other lieutenant, I think he was, and he said, will you please bury him outside on the grass verge outside my office at midnight. And even that was slightly inaccurate, because apparently he then subcontracted that to be done by somebody else. So that individual didn't personally, dig a grave. And it was quite controversial. Apparently Gibson was very angry with this carpenter. It was within his rights, braver man than I, to tell Gibson no, He's only a youngster as well, apparently, but he stuck to his guns and refused to do it, saying it wasn't a priority, I think perhaps it was unfortunate timing. I think that's probably the best way to say it, but it's a true story, apparently. So yeah, this is when he gets the rather sad news, and you can see the scene here, the bit you're familiar with there, and then you can see the camera crew filming the scene. And then of course, here's the famous cinema poster. And of course he does play, Guy Gibson is played so heroically and so perfectly by Todd. Has to be said that he did a great acting job. It was just not necessarily that truthful. A bit flattering, you might say. And then there's a list of all the aircraft that took part in the raid. In the film here, and what happened to them. And G for George. He filmed flying over the Lincolnshire countryside, and then all the casualties. Are quite sad. All the casualties, all the guys that didn't make it back. Hopgood's crew, Young's crew, Maudsley's crew, because Maudsley died, of course, didn't he? hit by flak on the way back. And it was getting light, you know, so this was one of the difficulties. They were returning, it was getting light, and very, very difficult to avoid being spotted. And there we go. What happened to the Dam's raid survivors? Well, here we go. Maltby, he and Les Knight, they flew against the Dortmund Elms Canal. They were both killed. Oh no. I think there was only 38 of them survived from 130 men. And of course they did the tall boy bombing of the Bielefeld viaduct. And it goes into the detail about what happened to the aircraft that survived the raid as well. But as I say, that's a great book, really is. I hope you enjoyed looking at the pictures. So I say only 38 men survived. So about basically 2/3 of the men who took part in the raid on that night did not survive the war, which is very sad, isn't it? Really. So there we go. And I say we've got the excellent account by George Johnny Johnson of that raid attack on Sorpe Dam, which they now made into a film. Something that you probably won't have seen before or know much about. I didn't, that's for sure. And there we have it. And I think I just raise a glass now and say, you know, in memory of all those people who gave so much sacrifice. It's quite heartbreaking, you know, that they weren't really treated as celebrities. They all got these awards, but that was it. They just went back to the day job of, you know, bombing Germany and these Lancasters, and the attrition rate was high. You only have to realise how few survived, you know, to know. And Gibson himself didn't survive. Shot down by his own side, unfortunately, by another bomber. Very sad. Most unfortunate. Most unfortunate. Anyway, I thought you might enjoy that. It's a difficult one to present, really. I thought we might maybe just go back and maybe we can just finish off. I'll just get myself zoomed in here, if you'll bear with me a second. And we'll just end the way we began, really. I'm going to move G for George out a little bit. Try and get us lined up nicely. There we go. How's that? So, I think it's a truly remarkable story, the Dambusters, because it was such a crazy idea, but it wasn't crazy, was it? It was very clever. You can understand why people like Bomber Harris were very sceptical about it, because it was complicated, limited chances of success. It required all the planets to be aligned, sort of thing. But it was carried out with such tenacity by people who, I mean, Gibson was famed as well. Something else I should mention about him finally is that I've said one or two things that not that positive about him, but that this is, you know, documentary fact. But he was a good leader. He was a great leader of men, and they all thought that this was a crazy scheme. He believed in it. He genuinely did believe in it, and you can see that in the film. He sort of takes it on board, and because he believes it, he's very infectious the way he gets his men to take it on board and believe in it also. And that is why they were excuse me, that is why they were so determined to punch through and to succeed in what was a really daring and desperately dangerous mission. And they succeeded, you know, and they did have an impact on the war production. It could have been a far more lengthy, longer term impact had the Bomber Harris and his team, you know, taken full advantage and taken the opportunity, which they didn't exploit it. Very strange thing to do. But there we go. A true story of incredible heroism. If you find it interesting today, if you enjoyed that book, I would recommend the Jonathan Falconer book without reservation. I think the most highly recommended book, if you want to learn the full story, is Chastise by Max Hastings. I cannot recommend that book highly enough. And on that note, I'd just like to say thank you for watching. I know it's been a long one, I've not been in best form today, but I really wanted to get this out and have it for people to watch at the right moment, at the right time, on the right day, when the raids were starting, and I thought you might find it interesting. And there we go. And obviously we've had the talk about the Tamiya Dambuster Lancaster there. Others are available. I understand that Border Model have now announced bit late. But they've now announced that they're going to have an upkeep P3 Lancaster Dambuster. Quite why they've waited till now, because it won't be out until the end of the year anyway, I don't think. Strange decision, and they did tell everybody that, you know, that spent £600 on that other kit, that it was going to be an exclusive thing. Anyway, there we go. We'll have to see what it's like when it comes out. Let's hope it's better than the first attempt with all its problematic glasswork, etc. And they need to get the price down. I think if they drop the price a bit, they might have a chance. I probably won't be buying that, to be honest. Far more likely to build the Tamiya one because it's the more sensible size. But anyway, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this little walk through history. I can never do it justice. I'm just sitting here talking about this, you know, in front of a camera. It's not a full documentary, but I was quite moved actually by the Chastise book by Max Hastings, and some of the images here are quite amazing. That they could actually pull this thing off. It was against all odds. You know, everything was seemingly against them. It was the most dangerous run into the target. I mean, the concept here is openly admitted by George Lucas, the filmmaker, that it was his concept for the original Star Wars film. Against the Death Star, this was based on the Dambusters. So you can see how it gripped people's imaginations. It was such a daring and an amazing endeavour. And whilst it had negative repercussions for people in the Ruhr Valley, of course, and for many of those crews, it just shows what can be achieved with ingenuity and determination in life, really. That's all I've got to say for today. Thank you very much for joining me. I drink a toast to the Dambusters, the memory of all those brave men. Cheers. May you rest in peace. Thanks for watching, folks. Please tune in again in the not too distant future. I'm going to be taking a bit of a break now, to be honest. And I look forward to seeing you again in the not too distant future. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.